Hi there, Linda Berens here again. I just want to share with you some things that we've been sharing with people in our community and connection class recently. Um, these times have been tough for a lot of us for a lot of reasons. Not only is there the pandemic, we find ourselves in conflict with people we might have been close to before, but polarized around our political views. And there seems to be such a polarization going on that we talked about um, going from polarity into compassion. And one of the things we teach people in our courses, and that many type practitioners have been doing for a long time, is doing a polarity activity. So do you have a preference for uh, intuition? Do you have a preference for sensing? And then what kinds of information are you going to pay attention to? Or we might just say directing language and informing language. And how do we, what do you want from each other? How can we resolve these differences when we're interacting? What is important in these larger issues, broader issues in a way, than, than perhaps learning about communicating together, is that we learn to go from this polarization where I'm right, you're wrong, my way is better, is good, and your way is bad, to some sense of compassion. And one of the problems that we have is that somehow or other we get into this mode and we don't really want to have compassion for the other person's view. We feel like it's threatening. This other view is threatening and it's very scary. And there was some research done where they discovered that it was impossible to feel curious while feeling threatened. So the way out of polarity is curiosity. But then if you feel threatened, how do you get to being curious? So in order to help us with that, one of the things that we've talked about is, well, why do we do type anyway? Why do we look at typological differences? First, it's to know yourself better so that you have a greater sense of self-awareness. You can reclaim sort of disowned superpowers that you have. Maybe you weren't allowed to use, or you really didn't get rewarded for using those, so you haven't been able to truly express yourself. That's one of the things that we use typologies for, is helping ourselves understand ourselves and increase our awareness so that we can notice when we're not getting our core needs met, when we're getting triggered, when we're stressed. That's one of the things that we teach people to do. And that has value in and of itself. The other thing we often do is help people understand others so that they can better resolve their differences or better meet the other person at their view of the world and see value in what the other person brings. Now, sometimes using typologies gets us into labeling, like, oh, well, you're just doing that. And we don't want to go there. What we want is always to have some sense of compassion. And what is compassion? Well, I don't know if I have a good answer for it, but compassion is, to me, a sense of deep understanding, of really feeling like there's something going on, some pain going on in the other person that we can understand and forgive if we feel wronged by it. Um, and so, how do we get to that point from being polarized? It doesn't mean you have to give up your view. It just means you need to understand the view, because when we get polarized, we've reduced everything to something very simple. And nothing about being human is simple. Nothing, especially in our more complex world that we live in. And so when we reduce things to right and wrong, black and white, I'm right, you're wrong, um, you know, the blue view is better than the red view, the white view is better than the black view, or the black view is better than all of those, better than what, all of those things that seem simple aren't really simple. And so by being curious, we can start to recognize some of the complexity and introduce the complexity and then find common ground. But just like with everything else, it starts with you. So if you find yourself in a relationship, in a conversation, or even watching the news or reading the paper, and you feel that tension that comes with polarization, like, oh, that's not good. That's not good. We can't have it this way. How do you get out of that? Because you are feeling threatened. Well, start with yourself. What about this is threatening to me? What about this is triggering me? What am I afraid of? Because when we're really afraid, it's very hard to be genuinely curious about the other view. So that's the first step. And as you do that and you increase your self-awareness and you start to realize that the way you're being threatened, and then you can ask yourself some questions, is this realistic? Is this fear real? Is it simply that? Is it more complex? Is there more to it that you need to understand or that I need to understand? And then you can use your type knowledge to help you get out of that, to help understand, are your core psychological needs getting met? Is it threatening in some way there? Are some of your core values being violated in some way? What can you do then to re-energize that and get your core needs met? And part of that is to realize that there are some things you can do to feel competent, to feel able, to feel empowered to do something, if it's nothing more than listening. So the big cure for all of this is listening to yourself, talking to yourself a little, listening to somebody else, and really understand where they're coming from. And so when you make that shift, you're listening, listening, listening. You're not listening the way we often listen, which is, I'm going to make this point, and I'm going to make this point. And here's a point I can make, and I can convince her that way, or I can convince him that way. But really to listen and expand and deeply understand where they are coming from. And if you do that, reflecting back, this seems really important to you. Tell me more about that. I'd really like to know. Well, lots of ways to ask questions I'm wondering about, or I wonder if you could help me understand this a little bit better. Then you will start to find at least a few places where there's common ground. And maybe what you thought was really awful is pretty awful if all of those consequences go the way you have. And maybe it's not quite as extreme as you're thinking it is. At least you will have gotten curious and helped somebody else feel understood, because that's really what we want. We want to be seen and to be heard. And when you listen and you paraphrase back or you confirm that we heard, you get curious, you ask more questions, people feel heard. And they don't feel as stuck in where they were coming from. So those are kind of the steps. Look at yourself, what's triggered in you, use your type knowledge about what your core needs are, your core drivers, your habitual patterns. Maybe it's requiring you to use a different cognitive process than you're comfortable with. Think about those things and realize that those are your perspectives, and what can you do to help yourself get those needs met? What can you do to recognize that maybe you're outside your favorite comfort zone? And then be curious and listen and listen and listen. Listen for understanding. So that curiosity can then lead to at least a beginning on having some compassion. And when you start to get that other information, you've now mirrored what the reality is, which is a little bit more complex. It's probably a lot more complex than any one of us can focus on. So let me just give you a couple of examples. One, I was having a whole lot of challenge with feeling angry, and I don't like to feel angry. It's not, in fact, I'd rather stay clear-headed and not have those emotions muddle my brain, and fearful. And the person that was at the cause of this, the cause, was their cause, um, I began to see that their core psychological needs were not getting met. And then I could then shift into having some compassion because I know how I feel when my needs aren't getting met. And so I could then start to wonder, well, I wonder why. What is it this person's after from that perspective? So it isn't just about recognizing the differences that we have, different patterns. And you can even have those differences when people have the same pattern, the same type, because that's not, we're more than that. So maybe there are other things that are in common. But anyway, so that's the kind of thing that I wanted to share with you. And some of the questions that you can ask that people shared with us in our community and connection session this week. So help me understand, or I wonder if you could help me understand, or it would be, I'd really like to understand. Whether you want to be directing or informing with it, that, whatever feels right, but not in a punitive way, and not, keeping your face as neutral as possible. Or I'm wondering about, and then just ask whatever it is you're wondering about. Or, let me hear more. Tell me a little more about that. And what else might there be that you're concerned about? So it's those opening up those questions and listening in such a way that you start to find and explore some of the differences that then you no longer are polarized, completely polarized on. You can at least have some sense of connection. I'll tell you, it's easier said than done, but the relief I felt when I finally got curious in my mind to ask, I wonder about the core psychological needs. And this is me wondering based on what I've seen. And then I could start to begin to offer a little forgiveness, or a little understanding, or a little compassion. So now that I'm thinking about, in the beginning with type differences, we wanted to understand type, and then it was so useful to improve our communication. I think now our focus needs to be on compassion, because if we can't have compassion, if we can't get curious and we can't have compassion, and we aren't taking care of ourselves, we're going to stay in a polarized state, and polarized states do damage. Polarized states don't create solutions. Only compassionate conversations could create some solutions to those very complex problems that we're all trying to solve. So that's my thought for the day, for the week. Just wanted to share that with you because it was such a rich conversation that we had at Community and Connection. It's the first Tuesday of every month, and you can sign up by going to InterStrengthInstitute.org, and you will find a course that you sign up for there. And I hope that you found this inspiring and helpful, and you can make a few comments. We would really appreciate that engagement. So thank you, and all the best to you.